It feels like church. You got so quiet. Hello, my name is Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here at the Center for Fiction. And I'm so happy to welcome you all here tonight. This is like a homecoming with some of our favorite people. And I'm sure you're some of our favorite people too. How many of you have never been here before? Okay, welcome. So you know, we're the only literary nonprofit that focuses on the creation and enjoyment of fiction, and we have like this beautiful home for readers and writers here. There's a member floor upstairs. You can find out more about that. I also want to say we have just a number of amazing writers coming through these doors this year, so make sure you're on our mailing list if you aren't yet. I also want to say a very special hello to those of you who are joining us via live stream tonight. And a few housekeeping announcements. We will have an audience Q&A, and if you're here, please raise your hand, and one of our fabulous interns will bring a microphone to you so that the people who are watching on our live stream can hear your question as well. And if you are on YouTube, you may type your question in the chat at any time, and we will read a few of your questions before we end the evening. Deshawn and Garth both were kind enough to come early and pre-sign copies of their books. And they will also personalize afterwards. So when the event is over, if you haven't purchased your book, you can go through those back doors to the bookstore and then come back in here and line up in the center aisle to get your books personalized. And now for our guest. Deshawn Charles Winslow's first novel, In West Mills, was the winner of the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, the Lambda Literary Award, the Publishing Triangle Award, and Willie Morris Award for Southern Writing. He's been featured as a writer to watch in the New York Times and one of the black male writers of our time in T, the New York Times Style magazine. He was born and raised in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, and graduated from the Iowa Writers Workshop. He now lives in Atlanta, and he's joined by the fabulous Garth Greenwell, the author of Cleanness and What Belongs to You, a 2020 Guggenheim Fellow and recipient of the 2021 Verso Award for Prose Style from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He teaches at Princeton University and lives here in New York. Please welcome them both to the stage.
Okay, have we turned these things on? Can you hear me?
Testing,
Okay.
testing.
Hi, Deshawn.
Hello.
It's so good to see you.
Good to see you.
Deshawn and I go way back. I was just trying to figure this out. We didn't overlap in the program at Iowa, but we overlapped in my time in Iowa. So you started the semester after I graduated. But we became friends then, and I'm a huge fan of the first novel. And it's a real joy to get to be here to celebrate the second. I wanted to start, usually when I do these things, I will sprinkle in plot as I ask my questions to try to sort of sketch out the territory. I'm scared to do that with this book because this is a book that actually, most of the novels, like the novels I write, they don't have plot. So there's no danger of sort of ruining someone's experience of the book, but there actually is with this. So I wanted to start by asking you to sort of disclose what you want to disclose, to let people who haven't read the book yet sort of give them the lay of the land.
Sure. So the year is 1976, and there has been a triple murder. The town's only black doctor and her two siblings have been shot to death in their home. And Josephine Wright, who was born and partially raised in West Mills, has recently returned to retire and to marry her childhood sweetheart. And when she comes back from a trip to New York, she learns that the Harmons have been murdered and that her fiance, their half brother, is being accused by the community, not the cops, of murdering them. And so because she's 60 years old, she's had some bad marriages and some bad relationships, and she wants this marriage to work. She wants this relationship to work really bad. So she wants to exonerate him, essentially. The novel also follows three other people who had beef with the victims, or particularly one in particular. And so we get to meet them and see what their dirty secrets are. Yeah, but they're indecent people, very indecent.
Interesting. I want to talk about the title and maybe how ironic it is, if it's ironic all the way down. But first, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the town, West Mills, and about why you decided to return to it for the second novel, having gone so deep in the first.
Mm-hmm. So first I'll kind of describe the makeup of the town. It's a small southern town. People are very self-sufficient. They have farms and small businesses, and they really kind of rely on each other for commerce. But this also means that everyone knows everyone, and they know each other's families. They know how long your family has been in the area. Everyone knows everyone. And the reason why I returned to West Mills is it was mostly logistics. Once I decided that decent people would involve some of the loving family, I said, okay, I have to use the setting again. Because it wouldn't have made sense to move the couple, Breezy and Eunice, and then their son Leroy. It wouldn't make sense to move them somewhere else. I couldn't come up with a logistical reason. But also, I wasn't quite done with West Mills. I'm still not done with it. I'm going to put it aside for a while. But I think I love that little town that I hate.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, the books take place in the same town. As you've already said, there are characters that kind of drift between both books. Mm-hmm. It's a real joy when Not appears as a minor character. She's the sort of central figure of the first novel. And also the timelines overlap. Mm-hmm. But in every other way, in sort of all of the kind of structural, formal ways, Decent People's a radically different book from In West Mills. In West Mills, I think we start in 1941.
41.
And we go to 1987.
Mm-hmm.
So, we follow decades. It's really centered on the life of this woman, Not, mm-hmm. and her friend Otis Lee and his family. And things happen. I just reread it, and it's, the pages turn themselves, it's very compelling. But it's not sort of plot heavy.
Right.
We really are kind of immersed in the texture of this town and the sort of slow shapes that lives make over decades. Mm-hmm. Decent People takes place over a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
And it's a whodunit.
Yeah.
It's a murder mystery. And so I just wanted to ask you what the experience was of writing such a different book, both in its relation to plot and its relation to time.
So once I decided that I wanted it to be a murder mystery, or for there to be a murder, then it became really fun to write. It really did. So I'll tell you a little bit about how it became a murder mystery. So originally, the Harmons were not going to be murdered. They were going to drown accidentally. And the reason for this is because at a holiday event before the pandemic, my mom is the second child of 9 children, and so there's a big age gap between her and some of her younger siblings. Mm. And so one of my younger aunts was like, do you remember when those 3 old ladies drowned in the canal? And I was like, what? 3 old ladies drowned in the canal? And my aunt was like trying to tell the story, and my mom was like, no, that's not what happened. And she started telling the story of these 3 old ladies. They were 3 old white ladies. They carpooled to church every Sunday morning. One of them was a hairdresser. As they were backing out of the hairdresser's driveway, she lived, like, the canal is here, this is her driveway, you know. And there were no borders, safety things. There are now, you know. But as they were backing out, y'all look bad. As they were backing out, something must have happened with her brakes or her heel, something. They went into the canal and they died. And so when I heard this story, I was really fascinated. I know that's morbid. I was fascinated by it because I had never heard it. But, you know, my mom and her sisters and brothers always told me stories about things that happened in their hometown, and I had never heard this story before, and I thought it was odd. So anyway, I just couldn't get it off my mind. 3 people drowning in the canal, 3 old ladies in a car. You know, it haunted me. And so I was gonna write about, you know, I changed them to Black people. I changed them from friends to siblings. I changed one of the people to a man, you know. But then I started to write, and I couldn't like get a groove. I couldn't get into it. I started writing Eunice's part and Savannah's part and Ted's part. But it was just like, you know. And so I was watching a lot of TV. It was 2020, 2021, watching a lot of TV and watching Murder, She Wrote, watching...
I also watched Murder, She Wrote.
Watching Matlock and all those shows. And I told my partner, Cole, I was like, I think I'm gonna turn this damn thing to a murder, you know? And then I was like, I don't know, 3 murders? Maybe I just kill one of them, keep 2 alive. And then I said, you know what? Screw it, all 3 of them. Yeah, so that's how it became a murder mystery. But yes, writing it was very, very different. I had no experience with pacing, as my editor Daniel will tell you. And so I felt as though I was tipping my hand too early, you know. But, you know, I took it slow, and I felt like I was getting it halfway right and got a draft in. But it was different because I had to balance. I wanted the book to be half literary, at least, and character driven. It's probably a better way to say that. And so I had to make sure that like every chapter I didn't forget about the murder, you know, and that someone, Joe, was trying to figure it out.
Right.
Yeah. So I had to make sure that I kept the murder not at the forefront of the characters' minds, but that it came up regularly.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you have, so you talk about sort of television. Did you have literary models? Like, are there crime writers who have been important to you, who you love?
No.
Interesting.
No.
Okay.
I read like I read like one murder mystery from cover to cover, and that was Anthony Horowitz. Now I'm forgetting the title because he has so many.
Right.
The Magpie Murders.
Okay.
Yeah, and I liked it. Not all of it, because he does some meta stuff, and I was like, I can't get with all that meta stuff. But, you know, the kind of overall structure, it was like reading a craft book.
Right.
Yeah. And so, but that's the only one, you know, that I've read cover to cover.
Well, so you mentioned character a minute ago, and, you know, I was also struck by the 2 books' different approaches to character. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, in West Mills, it really does feel like, you know, we are mostly very deeply immersed in Joe's consciousness. I think that we do also enter Otis Lee's consciousness. I think that's it, if I'm...
Yeah, just those 2.
Just those 2, and it's very heavily weighted toward Joe, and so... Sorry, mixing up the books, towards not. It's really heavily weighted toward not. And so it feels like this deep dive into consciousness, whereas this book, as you've already mentioned, it has 4 consciousnesses that we enter into. And, you know, Joe feels like a home base because sort of she's the one that returns, but we spend significant amount of time with Eunice, with Savannah, and then with Ted Temple, who's a kind of odd man out in some ways.
Yeah.
How early did you know that the book was going to do that, sort of have the sort of circle around these consciousnesses? And what were the challenges there in kind of making each of them, I don't know, sort of have the density they needed?
Mm-hmm. I knew very early on that it would be an ensemble. And the original pitch, it was going to be more people. And I ended up not using them all. And one of the characters I cut her in the editing process because I think I had ideas for her storyline that she would have taken over the book, And so I said, okay, I'll save that character. But yeah, so I knew early on, and so what became challenging was making sure. Well, this is the reason why I think I cut people, is because it was becoming hard for me to make connections so that they cross paths and the intersections. It was easy to make Savannah and Ted intersect because they're father and daughter. But I was like, how do I get this person to intersect with this person? And so then people started to fall off. Yeah. I wanted to challenge myself to do more than 2 POVs. Yeah. One of these days I'll just do one. One of these days.
It's also interesting to me how the book is organized. Because, I think each POV, maybe not Ted, but I think each POV, they come in like 3 chapter chunks.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you could imagine a different structure where sort of we would jump more often.
Mm-hmm.
Was that clear to you from the beginning that you wanted to have a sort of deep dive each time we shifted?
No, I think I did start off with pop,
Right.
pop. Yeah. And then I changed my mind for some reason.
Okay.
But I landed on the chunks.
Yeah.
And I liked the chunks.
Well, it seemed to me like a pretty savvy choice, because it does give, that feeling that In West Mills gives, with its very different approach to plot, of that kind of immersiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And, you mentioned sort of literary fiction versus genre fiction, which I was going to ask you about. I know you sort of seemed like you thought you were stepping in some trouble, so I'm just going to head for it and ask you a little bit about the difference. So I will say one of my favorite writers, and I think one of the great writers of the 20th and early 21st century, is P.D. James. I have read all of P.D. James's books, maybe my favorite writer of sentences in her generation. And thinking about actually crime fiction as sort of radically character-driven. And she has this quote, it comes from a book, I don't know which number it is in the Dalgleish murders, but it's from A Taste of Death. I just want to read this quote. So it's, if he had indeed been murdered, then the secrets would be told. Through his dead body, through the intimate detritus of his life, through the mouths, truthful, treacherous, faltering, reluctant of his family, his enemies, his friends. That is such a beautiful sentence, can we just say? Murder was the first destroyer of privacy, as it was of so much else.
Wow.
And so, murder as this thing that sort of radically strips away subterfuge and actually makes character, it's kind of like an X-ray of character. And I wondered if that resonated with your experience writing Decent People and the way that all of these secrets do start being sort of, and secrets that are not necessarily directly connected to the murder, but it's sort of like this whole community is stripped bare because of this violent act.
Yeah. So one thing that I found myself worrying about was the plausibility of these suspects, Eunice, Savannah, and Ted. Would they be angry enough to kill? Not just the one that they were angry with, the Harmon that they were angry with, but the other two as well. And at some points I would say, no, this is not, she wouldn't kill over that. He wouldn't kill over that. And then I would come back and sit and think about it, and I would say, you know what, they might. If so much else is tied to it, respectability, money, of course, I think they might. But yeah, I do think that the murder does strip the characters of a veneer. It forces them to They're trying to cover up what they've done. They're trying to cover up what could be exposed, and it does expose something really raw, I think, about all of them. And the characters who are kind of like off stage, just whispering a little bit here and there, the way they're so excited about it, and eager to accuse someone with little to no evidence.
Yeah.
It exposes a lot of people. And I think when I was writing it, I kept thinking back to when I was in middle school. A friend of mine, her father was arrested for trying to plot her mother's murder. Yeah, I'm from a small town. This shit was, so it was a big deal. And were we whispering in school. Her daddy tried to have her mama killed, and like for weeks it was all we could talk about. And she didn't come to school, and when she came to school, it was just, we looked at her as if she had been plotting her mom's murder, but it's funny how these things kind of like shake up a town. A place can go from being quiet and boring to everybody's phone is ringing. Adults and children are talking about these things. And so I kind of wanted to do this with these murders. And I felt like having the accidental death, as tragic as it would have been, I just didn't feel like it was punching the way I wanted it to.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it wasn't getting me excited, so I was afraid it wasn't going to get other people excited.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the book is really good on kids, and it's really good on family, and especially on parents and children. And, it strikes me that In West Mills is really about parents and children, too, and about, this character Knott's refusal to be a parent. This is a dumb question, but why do these books keep circling around that theme, that question of sort of the relationships between parents and children and how those relationships can go wrong, and the consequences of those relationships going wrong, even if, maybe especially if, as in Knott's case, as in the case of this book, in at least a lot of the cases, they're going wrong because of the best intentions.
Yeah. I think I write about these sorts of relationships, I guess primarily because my relationship with my parents are so strange, like really good, and it can be really, and has been bad, and I think that's what it's about. I think that there have been times in my life when I have wondered if my parents wanted to be parents. I mean, my father had many children before I came along, and there's always been this little lingering question: did he want a seventh kid? You know what I'm saying? And I think that, and he was a very, very loving father. And my mom had been told that she couldn't have children, and then she got pregnant. And there's always been this question, I think, did they want to have kids, or did they want to have me, and did certain things go wrong because I came along and like screwed up their plan, So I think that's why there's this theme that keeps coming back. That's probably the primary reason. But I think the other reason is because I grew up in a community where so many people had children that they didn't raise, or they partially raised them, and they had their relationships with their mothers and fathers might be kind of like siblings because the grandmother had raised them, And I think I just grew up observing these types of relationships and just thinking, how many people have kids and don't want them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, somebody who doesn't want kids and avoided them is Joe.
Yeah.
Who is your sort of detective character. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about her and sort of her invention and how she took shape for you.
Yeah. So Jo was a difficult character to write. I had to keep going back and fleshing her out. So Joe is in this, in the novel, she's 60 years old. She's lived in New York most of her adult life. She's, she married a writer, and then she married another guy, I'm forgetting. But
I think she forgets him too.
yeah, and then she had an affair with a colleague, but she's a strong, educated black woman. Mostly, she's independent, but she's still old school. I mean, this is a woman who was born in the early 1900s, and so she still kind of wants a man, as much as she tells her brother, I don't need a man. And he's like, well, you engaged to a murder suspect. So, maybe you want a man more than you think you do.
Right.
And so, but she is, she's really good. Like she's kind of perfect. And there were times when I thought, Joe is too perfect. I have to give her, maybe she gave away a baby, left a baby on a doorstep or something. But then I was just like, no, I need for her to be the decent person, because nobody else in the novel is really decent, Even Leroy, even though he's a victim, even Leroy is willing to like blackmail.
Right.
Of this 14-year-old is like, I will take y'all down if y'all don't
Right.
leave me alone.
Right.
So I needed Joe to be pure. Someone had to be pure.
But even Joe, she's not immune to this suspicion that circulates around the community.
Yeah.
And even though she loves her fiance Limp, and even though she claims from the start, there's no way he could have done this, I know he's innocent. In fact, she has doubts.
She has doubts, yeah. So she's guilty of not trusting him. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Well, and I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about one other character. Mm-hmm. So of the 4 consciousnesses that we enter, 2 of them are black. Mm-hmm. And this is a largely segregated town.
Yes.
Right? So the west side is black, largely black, and the white side is the east side is largely white. Mm-hmm. So we have 2 sort of consciousnesses that are black and 2 that are white. One of those, Savannah, had married a black man. She has 2 black sons. Mm-hmm. And she lives on the west side. Yeah. And has been rejected by her family, has been rejected by the east side, but is also largely rejected by the west side. Yeah. And everybody on the west side almost calls her by her maiden name, mm-hmm. refuses to call her by her married name, which is the name she uses. Her husband died. Mm-hmm. And the 4th consciousness that we enter, or that we have access to, is her father, mm-hmm. Ted. I find him such a fascinating character. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you, because I find him an immensely rich character. Mm. I mean, this is a man who has done awful things. I think very early on in the book, there's a line that sort of says, Ted Temple, not quite a Klansman, which is a kind of amazing thing to say. And he, at a certain point, he has been, he is a racist, there's no question, but he's a racist who feels like he has come a long way. Mm-hmm. He has always been restrained in terms of sort of triggering a kind of violence that is at his disposal, like the violence of the Klan. Mm-hmm. For instance, when Savannah, as a young woman, introduces him to the man she's going to marry, mm-hmm. he tells a cop, you let them go. Yeah. They say they're going to leave town, they're going to go to New York, and he makes sure that this cop, who otherwise would do them harm, mm-hmm. doesn't do them harm. Mm-hmm. But he knows he could do them harm. Yeah. And at several points, he thinks, I'm not a Klansman, I'm not part of that. There's another white man in town who calls him brother, and he always says, I'm not part mm-hmm. of that. And the guy kind of winks at him. And Ted thinks, there's somebody I could call if I need someone to be heard. So access to violence.
Yeah.
You know, he has severed or all but severed his relationship with his daughter. And yet it's very clear that he loves his daughter. And it's very clear that he is capable of love that defies the racism that has structured his life.
Yeah.
I'm just interested to hear about constructing him as a character, inhabiting his consciousness. And in a moment when I often feel, and I feel this a lot in my students' writing, that sort of racism is a kind of hermeneutic that utterly evacuates a character of any kind of any other meaning. That if a character is shown to be racist, to be sullied by race, they are flattened. There's nothing else you need to know about them. Ted's not that kind of character. He has a humanity that is undismissible, even as he does deeply unhuman things. I just wanted to hear about the challenge of that.
Yeah. So there's a Bell Hooks essay called Understanding Patriarchy that I read some years ago and shared it with students over the years. And there's a line where she says, we all are victims of patriarchy, or we all perpetuate patriarchy, or something like that. And so that, that line or paragraph has stuck with me over the years. And so when I was constructing Ted, I wanted to create a character who is, all of my characters, I believe, are victims of patriarchy in both of the books. But I wanted to see a white man who has all this power, like you mentioned, but he himself is also a victim of patriarchy. And so he comes from a line of wealthy white men, and he was a second son and really didn't expect to have to be in charge of anything. And what does his brother do? Up and die. It's kind of like Queen Elizabeth's dad,
And that was an accident.
Yeah.
That was an accident.
Yeah. And so now he's like, shit, now I got to be in charge and be a white man, And so he, for once, he's like, well, I have an opportunity to be kind of not self-made, but to have respect that's not passed down. I can make decisions that don't involve my brother and my mother and my father. And he's about to be Ted Temple, just Ted Temple, not Ted Temple, the younger brother of, or Ted Temple, the son of. And I wanted to show that he is, he just wants to be a respected dude. But in order to maintain that respect, or to have the respect that his brother and his father had in the community, it means like he can't be a leftist, He has to uphold his views on race, on all of it, So yeah, but I wanted to challenge myself not to write a stock 60-year-old white Southern man, yeah. I'll just tell a quick story. When I was growing up, there was a man who had a little store about the size of this stage on the corner of my road, and his name was Mr. Logan, right? And he was an old white man, and his house was behind his store. And so we would go to the store and it would be closed, but we would see his car and we would say, Mr. Logan, Mr. Logan. And then he would come out with his cane. It would take him 30 minutes to walk from the house to the store. And he would sell us, we wanted his old ass candy, But he was really, really nice to us, right? And sometimes he gave us free stuff, and then when we would turn teenagers, he would sell us cigarettes, and we weren't supposed to have cigarettes. They would be old, expired cigarettes. But he would sell us the cigarettes. And so anyway, I remember one day, I asked my mom to stop me by Mr. Logan's. And she was like, no, I ain't going, you ain't giving no more money to Logan. And I was like, why not? And she was like, he's a Klansman, you know? And I was like, really? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, Mom, you think every white man is a Klansman? And she said, no, he's a Klansman. And I said, wow. And, but anyway, he came up when I was writing this and he had a daughter. I never knew her name, but I do know he had one child and it was a daughter. But I always wondered if the Mr. Logan that we, the black kids, saw was the real Mr. Logan.
Right.
And that the Mr. Logan that my mother knew was a Klansman was the person he had to be for his people, his community. You know, I always wondered that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, another thing about the characters in this book, or another big division of the characters in this book, and something that distinguishes them from Nott and Otis Lee, is that there's a real division between the people who live in West Mills who have gone away and lived somewhere else, lived in Chicago, lived in New Jersey, especially lived in New York, and those who have stayed in West Mills and have always been there. You know, I think Joe, Eunice, all of the Harmons, Savannah, they have all lived most or a significant part of their life in New York. I think only Limp and Ted among the major characters, and Ted went away to college, but I think he stayed in North Carolina.
Yeah.
But he went away to college and came back. But Ted and Limp are the characters who have spent their whole lives in this town. What's at stake in that dynamic and that division? And, you know, what's so interesting? Or I guess I'm so interested in what makes these characters come back to this place that, as you say, there are lots of reasons you might want to stay away. And we should say that Joe's brother, who's gay, he's like, what are you thinking going back to that place? And she says, come visit. She says, you could buy a house here. And he says, I will never step foot in that town again. So what is it that pulls them back? And I mean, it's kind of a question, you know, in part, because you also have been pulled back to, you know, in writing this book. So what is it that pulls back? What's so undeniable about this place?
You know, someone asked me this question recently, and I don't know. I think part of it is, and I might just be projecting onto myself, I think part of it is growing up in a small town and then leaving. You leave behind people that you love and that have treated you well and stuff. And I think that there can be a little bit of guilt about, like, I got out, sorry you didn't, you know? And I think sometimes people return to sort of, to toss off that guilt.
Right.
Yeah. These characters, most of them come back. Eunice's was a failed music career, you know? And Joe comes back to retire. The Harmons, it was, you know, the riots. That's the reason that she gives money. You know, her business was being ruined by the riots. But I think sometimes people, when they leave a small town, go and stay away for a decade or two and then come back. When there's no, like, practical reason to come back, sometimes I think it's guilt for leaving in the first place. Yeah. I have guilt. I still have guilt about leaving my hometown. And I've been gone 25 years. I'm not going back to my hometown to live. But it doesn't mean I don't sometimes feel a little guilty about leaving.
Do you go back to visit?
Yeah, but not often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel that. I didn't go home for like 15 years.
Wow.
I refused to. I remember once we had to drive through. I was with my sister. We had to drive through, and she wanted to spend the night.
Yeah.
And I stepped out of the car, and I said, "We are driving.
We
are getting out of this town before we stop." So I feel that. I want to ask about desire in the book, and I want to ask about queer desire in the book, because it does seem that I mean, queerness is all over both books. And it's interesting because I would not say that the books are centered on queerness. The queer characters are not sort of in the center. But you make them visible. You make them visible in a place where they're not invisible in the place, but they're unspeakable.
Yeah.
They're seen, but they're unseeable. They have to be denied. I wondered what you think about sort of desire, and especially transgressive desire. Queer desire, also desire that crosses these boundaries of race, as a kind of motor of the book, of both books. You know, there's a wonderful line in Decent People, I forget the character who says it, but it's, folks lose their mind over some lovin', don't they, right? And this is a book about people losing their minds over desire. Were you thinking about that as you wrote it?
Yeah, I think because these characters, I mean, Leroy is only 14, but his mother has looked at these magazines that he's turned down to underwear ads.
That hit a little close to home. I
Yeah.
have to say, these underwear ads and these catalogs.
Yeah.
We passed those around at school.
I know. And they weren't even adult magazines. They were like Sears magazines.
Exactly. That's how bad it was before the internet.
Yeah. You get your kicks where you can, you know.
We did.
So yeah, there's Leroy, who's obviously going through puberty, and he knows what he's attracted to, and his mother discovers it, and he knows that he has to hide it, you know. There's Laz, who people suspect is gay.
This is one of the people
one
who
of the
murdered.
murder victims, and he can't be out and open. And then there's the interracial couples, and they meet and they find a bond and they want to be together, and everyone is like, no, you can't.
Right.
Even in the 70s. So back to your question, I think what these desires fueled for me as the writer is because these people can't have, at least they can't comfortably have what they want, what they desire. They have to sneak, which is bad behavior.
Right.
And then you have to cover the bad behavior. Yeah. Ethan Kanan's lesson on bad behavior, I take it with me.
Well,
for
share
every
it,
book.
because I didn't get to study with Ethan, so share it with us.
Basically, the concept is that if characters do something bad, it creates plot. You know, they do a bad thing, and then they have to cover up the bad thing, and then in trying to cover up the bad thing, they do another bad thing. You know, and so bad behavior. If you start with that, you got a book. You know. Yeah, but I did want this book to be a lot about people wanting something that they can't have and trying to cover up the desire and the thing that they did out of desire.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm coming up on my last couple of questions, so I hope you guys are thinking of some questions in the audience. But I wanted to quote P.D. James at you again, because I think she's so smart.
You want to read her now?
She's real good. And she said this thing, and she said this in a lot of different places, in a lot of slightly different ways, but it's always this idea. She says, what the detective story is about is not murder, but the restoration of order. In that sense, it's like a Shakespeare tragedy, right? That there's a social order, the social order is disturbed, and then the social order is reconstituted. And she says that that's the pleasure and the comfort of the detective story. And I found myself feeling that cannot be true of this book. Because the order that is disturbed, and that therefore some members of this community are trying to reconstitute, is such a grievously unjust order. You know, the forces of law in this book are not on the side of good. They're not on the side of justice. You know, the white police chief, he wants to just say, these 3 black people were killed, must have been a drug deal, somebody coming down from New Jersey. I'm not going to spend my money investigating that. That's not an order you want reconstituted.
Right.
And I wondered how you feel, you know, in the light of P.D. James's quote on this idea of sort of reconstituting order. I mean, whether that resonates with how decent people comes to an end, which we're not going to talk about. Mm-hmm. But, is this a book about reconstituting order? Or is this a book about trying to break some kind of order down?
I think if Joe were to answer the question, Joe would probably say she's trying to reconstitute order amongst the Black people in the town, because they lost their shit on limp, knowing full well that he was a good person who wouldn't kill a fly, but where the law is concerned, I think you're right. I don't think that it can be restored, with these racist institutions, not just racist, but racist classes, all of it, patriarchal
absolutely.
institutions in place. So thank you for reading that quote. But yeah, I don't think it can be restored. I don't think these characters can fix that problem.
Right.
Yeah. And even the gossipy stuff. Mm-hmm. I was saying in a recent conversation that I believe that once something bad is out there about a person, even if it's proven to be false, some people will still hang on to it. Well, you remember when people thought so-and-so had done such and such?
Yeah. No, I think that's really true.
Yeah.
Even before Twitter in the 1970s.
Yeah. You can't win with people.
And my last question, I want to ask about this word decent in your title. I want to ask also about community. There are characters in this book who talk a lot about community. Mm-hmm. And yet, this is a community, as we've been saying, in which it is very hard to think of community as a value. As you say, I mean, even on the west side of town, even among this Black community, those are the ones who are leaving threatening notes on Joe's car. Those are the ones who are saying, don't you have any self-respect? How are you still with this, this murder suspect? We have Joe's brother, and Joe says at one point, because people keep, you capture really wonderfully the way people sort of are kind about gayness in the book.
Yeah.
And the way that they say things like, the Lord will fix it in his own time. Mm-hmm. And Joe says, leaving small town life is what fixed him. He's fine. Mm-hmm. Is community a positive value in this book? Or is community maybe something that's so broken it can't be fixed, even on the west side of town? Mm-hmm. And also, what is decency? Who are decent people?
Mm-hmm. I believe that community, my mother always says that you will only have a few real friends in your whole life. She said you will know a lot of people, and a lot of people will do nice things for you. She said, but you'll only have 2 or 3 real friends in your entire life. Screw community. She didn't use those terms, right. But I think that's what I'm getting at. Limp believed that these people knew him and trusted him, and the moment they heard that he cursed out his sister or cursed about his sister, they were ready to label him a murderer. Right. And so all of that goodwill that he had built his whole life was washed. So to answer your question, I think it's a very case-by-case basis, and I don't think that community always has to be big. I think a community could be 4 people in a room. Right. Yeah. I'm sorry, I kind of forgot the rest of the part of the question.
That was real good. What is decency? Who are decent people? What makes people? I mean, these are church-going people.
Yeah.
These are people for whom decency is real important.
Yeah.
And yet, as you said at the start of the conversation, so many of them are deeply indecent. So what is decency?
Yeah.
Who are decent people?
I think decent people are those who are compassionate to others, almost unconditionally. And, you know, it's hard to be decent, but I think for people to kind of mind their own business, you know? I mean, I know there are times when we have to get into other people's business a little bit, you know?
But less often than we think.
Right.
Less often
Far
than we
less
think.
often than we think.
Yeah.
So I think decent people are good to others without expecting anything in return. And yeah, that's a hard one. You saved that one for the end.
I
That's a
did.
hard one.
When you'd be tired.
Yeah.
Well, that's a high standard. What about questions from the audience? I think, is there a microphone to pass around maybe? Yeah. So just.
So if you have a question, you can just raise your hand and we'll come over to you with a microphone.
I really appreciate how much you shared your process
Thank you.
and how much you shared the struggle of revision and reconsideration and all that. It was just incredibly powerful how much you shared that. I wanted to thank you for that.
You're welcome.
The other thing that struck me is I'm kind of old-fashioned, and I make a big distinction between fiction and nonfiction. And what your presentation tonight made so clear is that that distinction is really false. And I wondered if you wanted to comment on that at all, the degree to which you draw from your own town and from your own experiences, and I don't know how to put this exactly. Is that hard for other people in your life? Do you feel uncomfortable with doing that in any way, or is that what novelists do? So there. Did you follow what I'm saying?
I'm glad you're being asked this question.
Thank you for the question. So, so far, I have not written autobiographical fiction. What is that? I'm sorry?
What do you call your fiction?
Oh, it's just plain fiction. It's plain fiction. I mean, I think I understand what you're saying. So yeah, I mean, I sympathize and empathize and have shared experiences with Leroy, for example, but not exactly. You know, like my parents never took me to try to be de-gayed. You know, they never did that. But I know it exists. You know, and so I write a lot from a place of like, what if? You know, so what if my mom wanted to take me to be fixed? Who would she have taken me to in that town, you know? And I think I didn't ask her, but I think she would probably take me to a pediatrician, you know? So to your question about whether, and I do write about the attitudes of where I'm from, you know? But to your question about how they feel about it, that the true answer is that I don't know, because only a couple of family members have told me that they've read the book and read either of my books, and they haven't said I liked it. You know, they just said I read your book. Yeah. So maybe they are offended, but if they are, it has to be because they saw their own behaviors. You know, so. I'm going to assume that all of my family members read my book and that they're not talking about it because they're doing some deep searching.
Great answer.
Got time for one more question if anybody has one. Well, I'll ask one if you guys want to think of one more. Deshaun, you said you want to take a break from West Mills. What do you want to do?
I think the next book is going to be set in a real life town, and a whole new cast of characters. No overlapping, you know, because West Mills is a fake place, which means those characters are fake, you know. I mean, I write fiction, so it's all fake. But yeah, I think a real life town in the 80s and a shorter book next time. Not much shorter, but I want to write a book under 200 pages for a change. Yeah, I say that now, it'll be 350, but I'm going to try to write a 200-page novel.
I want to ask you another question.
Sure.
Ron Charles,
Yeah.
one of the best critics in America, compared you to Faulkner.
That's crazy, right?
What does that feel like?
I don't know. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful, it's a wonderful feeling. I still don't even, it's weird. Like every time I read a review that's favorable, it blows my mind. A little backstory. So I was an extremely slow learner. I failed the 3rd grade, went to summer school, and they thought I was going to fail again. And I think my dad threatened somebody and was like passing, and so I did. So I did not fail again. But I was a very slow learner. I started my reading level was it was hard. Teachers would call on me to read, and it was like my eyes just would not stay on a line. It was rough. And so I believed that I was what we called LD in the 80s, in the early 90s. And so when the fact that I even graduated high school still blows my mind because I was so developmentally challenged. So when I read what someone has written about a book I wrote, I'm just like, they are bullshitting me, But then I have my partner, and my friends, of course, who say, that's not bullshit. I've read the book, and I feel the same way, So, but old habits and old thought patterns die hard, To me, I'm still that kid who can't read. Like Garth asked me today, are you going to read? I said, no, yesterday. I said, hell no, I'm not reading. Because I'm afraid that I'm going to get up there and the words won't come out, or I'm going to mispronounce every word that I wrote. And, that was 3rd grade. And here I am still feeling that way. So yes, to have someone to make those kind of comparisons about me is strange. It's a strange, wonderful thing, though. Yeah.
Sounds right to me.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, you guys.
I just want to say real quickly, I wanted to thank Garth for taking the time out from his schedule to do this. He's a very busy person, writing his own books, teaching other people how to be a writer, living in New York City where there's lots of things to do on a Wednesday night, And so I just wanted to say thank you. And of course, I want to thank the Center for Fiction, who has had my back since the first book, So thank y'all. Yeah, thank you.
All right, so now we'll switch over into the part where you get to tell Deshawn and Garth how much you love them face to face. Just go get your books at the bookstore and then come back here and line up here, and we'll see you at the signing.
That was amazing, wonderful. Thank you.